It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Israel's most intense day since the start of the ground invasion. The south and north of Gaza now under heavy bombardment as Sky News teams witness hospitals overrun, including children caught up in the fighting.
Look what happened to him, this child. What has this child done? Is he carrying any weapons?
Also tonight, we will stop the boats. The government signs a new treaty to reignite the deal to send people who travelled to the UK illegally to Rwanda.
Do this despite the fact that it is difficult and sensitive, because if we don't address these issues, the people that will ultimately be the winners are the people smugglers.
What it's like to make the crossing, the story of one man who made it to the UK last week and his brother who says he's prepared to come to the UK with his family despite the dangers. A man has been arrested after a heavily pregnant woman was stabbed in Aberfan in South Wales. And Prince Harry takes the Home Office to court, saying he was treated unfairly when his security protection was downgraded. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. Israel says its troops are now in the heart of Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city. The south was once considered a safe zone for the people of Gaza, but now Israel's military is focusing much of its operation there, spreading from the north. It's aimed to wipe out the territories of Hamas's rulers. Well, the southern commander of Israel's Defense Force said today had been its most intense day since the beginning of the ground operation. So Israel's military now expanded its ground offensive into the south, focusing on Gaza's second city. Residents in several neighbourhoods in Khan Yunis were the latest to be told to evacuate yesterday and move further south. Today, Israeli tanks were seen digging in to the north of the city, and air assaults were described as some of the IDF's heaviest bombardment to date. Israel has identified what it says are designated safe zones for civilians, which include neighbourhoods in Rafah, Al-Mawazi, and in the north, zones in the east and west of Gaza City. But Sky News' analysis of the maps released by the IDF has found that some of these zones appear partially or sometimes entirely within areas that civilians have been told to flee. Well, Sky News journalists in Gaza have witnessed hospitals in the north and the south seemingly overwhelmed by the number of injured. A warning: this report from our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has images of seriously injured people, including children.
This is really quite extraordinary. The Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis is overwhelmed. It is utter chaos. They ran out of beds days ago. Now they're running out of space on the floor. It's covered in blood. Children, men, women, young and old, injured from airstrikes on homes and schools, lie, in many cases, clinging onto life. This injured little boy holds on to a sweet. He's lying on the floor. He's alone. There really isn't much that can be done for them. It's not hopeless because the staff keep going, regardless of the odds of keeping many of them alive. Incredibly, the situation is actually getting worse in Khan Yunis. It's hard to imagine it could, but it is. There was shelling, he says, holding back tears. I can't speak. Outside, the stream of injured arriving at the hospital is at times a constant. Terrified and hurting, little ones are carried inside to take their place amongst the horrors of the emergency rooms. The fighting is set to intensify in the south of Gaza. The suffering is relentless. In the north, in Jabalia, panic hits the streets. The fighting is intensifying here too, as Israeli forces move in. They are running. There is shooting everywhere in front of them. They'll head for shelter at another hospital that itself is barely functioning, and its compound is overflowing with people already. Some just make it inside.
Everyone left. They were continuously shelling us last night. We just arrived, we were about to go to sleep. Then everything started. People were hit all around us. Everything was destroyed. Look what happened to him, this child. What has this child done? Is he carrying any weapons?
Outside of the towns, the roads are lethal as well. An ambulance gets caught up as firing sweeps along the road in front of them. There is absolute panic. They have dead bodies on board. They turn to make a getaway. People run down the road trying to get in with them. They pause while a member of the team catches them up. It's simple. Everyone is running away. The United States, amongst other nations, has told Israel too many civilians are being injured and being killed in their campaign against Hamas. Israel says it's listening, but the campaign continues. The people of Gaza are simply stuck in the middle of a brutal war.
And Stuart Ramsey joins me live now from Jerusalem. Stuart, in the south, families fleeing once again. So why is the fighting intensifying, as we saw today?
I think it's they're moving into densely populated areas, and certainly their planning feels that the Hamas leadership is going to be in the south and more fighters. So I think the Israelis are firing a lot. They say themselves it's been very intense, in fact, one of the most intense days. And the problem is, because there's so many people in the south, because many of them came from the north, they're simply getting caught up in it. A lot of buildings are being destroyed. And as we saw in that report, they're going to hospitals. A lot of people are going to hospitals anyway, just to find safety. But it's not particularly safe moving on the streets tonight. We're told that many people on the east side of Khan Yunis have been told they have to stay in their houses because just being outside could be lethal. So it's very, very difficult time for everyone who is there. And I think the problem for the Israelis is that they said they're going to release the hostages. They say they're going to take out Hamas completely. But of course, they've achieved neither of those aims. The international community is becoming increasingly worried about the numbers of death and the numbers of injured people who were there. And so is there an element that the time is running out for them? It's unclear, but it would suggest they have fronts both in the north and in the south. Certainly the Israelis seem to ramp things up, perhaps to try to get the job done.
Stuart, live there for us in Jerusalem. Thank you. The Home Secretary has signed a new treaty with Rwanda in the hope of tackling the issue of illegal immigration and sending people finally to the country. Speaking in the capital, Kagili, today, James Cleverly said it was a crucial step forward to stopping the boats, and he hoped the scheme would be up and running as soon as possible. Well, the government had yet another setback when the Supreme Court ruled that Rwanda was not deemed a safe country for refugees, something Mr. Cleverly said he feels that this treaty addresses, and that Rwanda had made a series of commitments for the safety of migrants. Well, the Home Secretary arrived in Rwanda this morning. Our Africa correspondent Israel-Gaza reports now from the capital, Kagili.
The first of its kind to ever be signed, a 43-page internationally binding treaty between the UK and Rwandan governments to formalise the deportation of asylum seekers to Kagili.
We do this despite the fact that it is difficult and sensitive, because if we don't address these issues, the people that will ultimately be the winners are the people smugglers. They are the slave traders. They are the criminal gangs, and they are the extremist voices who always take advantage of human difficulties and hardship.
This move comes after the UK Supreme Court deemed the plan unlawful and judged Rwanda to be unsafe for asylum seekers who cannot risk being sent back home.
How did we go from model to dangerous country in just 4 short years? And how much of this perception is linked to internal UK politics? This being said, I would say that there is always a room for improvement to any system designed by human beings.
This is a last-ditch effort by the UK government to stop the boats and deter illegal migration. But almost 29,000 migrants have crossed the Channel into the UK this year alone, already surpassing the numbers of those who crossed in 2021, the year before the deal was announced.
Well, we intend to stop the boats as quickly as possible. I'm not going to set a deadline. I want to do it straight away. I want to do it as soon as possible. That's why we're working with real energy here in Rwanda.
James Cleverly is the third UK Home Secretary to visit Kagili since April 2022. But not a single asylum seeker has made the trip from the UK as part of the deal. Hope Hostel, their designated accommodation, has been standing empty for at least 18 months. And costs have increased from £120 million to at least £140 million. What do you think of this deal between the UK and Rwanda to send asylum seekers here?
It's a good thing because it's going to promote the relationship between countries.
So as a Rwandan, if you had to choose between living in the UK and Rwanda, what would you choose?
According to me, I can choose to live in the UK. Yeah, because there is some development, there's some different activities more than in Rwanda. But in Rwanda, there's some peace.
The partnership has been signed and sealed with a hug, an easy agreement between two beneficiaries. But now to the constant stumbling block, getting it passed on UK soil. Israel-Gaza, Sky News, Kagili.
Well, our political editor Beth Rigby joins us now. Rwanda, part of a series of policy announcements on migration, with the Conservative Party digging in different trenches on this, Beth.
Absolutely, Anna. Look, the policy in itself is difficult enough. The Rwanda Treaty, the emergency legislation that the Prime Minister wants to pass through Parliament is all about trying to get those flights off the ground by next spring to Rwanda. It's his promise to the British people. It looks really difficult, but when you look at the politics of what's going on behind me and over in Parliament, well, it's looking nearly impossible any which way the Prime Minister looks, because he has a party tonight in open warfare about how he should proceed. This evening, we have seen two rival groupings in the parliamentary party making public overtures to the Prime Minister and warnings about what they want to see. On the right of the party, you have three different groups coming together, numbering maybe up to 100 MPs, insisting that the Prime Minister should disapply human rights obligations, be that the European Convention of Human Rights, when it comes to Rwanda policy, in order, they think, to make sure that it gets through the courts and it cannot be blocked by either domestic or international courts. That's what they want and are demanding. And then on the other side, you have the One Nation group, the mainstream Conservatives, as they would put it, warning the Prime Minister publicly not to withdraw from international obligations around human rights. One of them writing that it would be a mistake, and moderate and mainstream Conservative MPs will struggle to support this. So on both sides, the Prime Minister has up to 100 MPs warning him that he could rebel if they don't much like the policies he is putting forward. So he's dealing with huge splits. If the policy is hard enough, the politics are really, really difficult. And if he loses a vote, and they're rattled about it because he lost his first vote in the Commons last night, well, then the Prime Minister is in really dangerous territory, a really difficult time for him.
Beth, live there in Downing Street for us. Thank you. Well, despite the government's efforts to tackle migration, still people keep coming to the UK illegally. Home Office figures show that more than 28,000 people have attempted to cross the Channel in small boats up to November this year. Well, Sky News has spoken to one man whose brother made it to the UK on a boat just last week. His other brother was killed by the Taliban in Afghanistan. He says he and his family will do what they can to also come to the UK. Sky's communities correspondent Becky Johnson has the story.
Men cling to the side of this small boat as there's barely room for all the people on board. Children and a woman huddle in the middle. This was last Thursday, filmed by this man, Omar, from Afghanistan. We've agreed to protect his identity. The boat began to take in water, but they made it to the UK. We know because Omar contacted his brother to say he was here. For Wazir, it was a huge relief.
I received a call and told me that he's just safe. He made me really happy.
It's such a dangerous journey to make by small boat. Why was he so desperate to get here to the UK?
Because the country which is pay attention to the human rights, especially the UK peoples.
It's a view he stands by, despite the British government signing a new treaty with Rwanda to remove asylum seekers. Are you worried about that?
Yes, I'm really worried about that. And I requested to stop. I only hope they have those people who are in the UK and fighting against these roles. And they believe that those people who are challenging the government, they can provide a safety to them.
Omar fought in the Afghan National Army. Wazir worked as an interpreter for British forces. Their older brother was murdered by the Taliban. Omar fled Afghanistan to Iran last year, then crossed into Turkey. He then travelled to Serbia and spent months crossing Europe, arriving in Switzerland in July. From there, he headed to France and waited in Calais for weeks before crossing on the 30th of November.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
He was one of 224 people to make the journey that day alone, the dangerous culmination of a year of travel. And despite the risks, Wazir and his family are now following his brother. Along with his wife and children, he's recently left Afghanistan and paid smugglers to get them all to Britain. He knows they face many months of travel, but believes that regardless of government policy, the UK will remain the destination of choice for many. If planes did start taking off to Rwanda with migrants on board, would people stop making that dangerous journey in small boats, do you think?
I don't think so. They'll go. They don't have any other way.
Wazir hasn't heard from Omar since he arrived. He believes he's been taken to one of the UK's migrant processing centres, and like many thousands of others, will now have to wait to find out if he has a future in Britain. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
A man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a 29-year-old woman who's understood to be heavily pregnant was stabbed in the street in the South Wales village of Aberfan. Schools and a community centre were locked down, with police urging people to avoid the area as they searched for the suspect. Our correspondent Dan Whitehead reports.
It was an attack that led to an armed police manhunt. A 29-year-old woman understood to be heavily pregnant, stabbed in the street in Aberfan. Kira Terrett was walking her dog nearby.
I'd covered her in my coat, and then by this time, because I was screaming and she was screaming, the neighbours had come out with pillows and towels. One of the girls down the street is a nurse, so she was putting the towels, putting pressure on the wounds for her. But yeah, it was awful.
I just went out and just held towels against her wounds then. My husband's lived here all his life, and he said it just doesn't happen here, and it's really shocking that it has. But yeah, you just don't hear things like this happening at all.
The victim was taken to hospital in Cardiff. As armed police began their search in the immediate area, it triggered a series of events. Local schools and nurseries went into lockdown. Kira's two boys, 13-year-old Ellis and 11-year-old Blaine, were kept indoors at Avontaff High School as a precaution.
I was in science, and the tannoid went off saying that we were going into lockdown, so I was scared really. I didn't know what was going on.
The teachers were just shocked. I seen one of the teachers outside speaking to the police. We, like Elle said, we couldn't go out the school ground, we couldn't play football.
It was just before 4 p.m, 7 hours after the attack, that the search for the suspect ended.
A 28-year-old local man was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. The man is known to the victim and is currently in police custody.
The victim remains in hospital, her injuries not thought to be life-threatening. Tonight, the Valley community remains in shock. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Aberfan, South Wales.
The Duke of Sussex has begun a High Court challenge against the Home Office over the protection of his family. Prince Harry's security was downgraded when the Sussexes stepped back from being senior working royals. But his lawyers have argued the couple were being treated unfairly. A warning, this report from Sky's royal correspondent Laura Bundock contains flash photography from the start.
When Prince Harry left his royal role, he lost his automatic security. But did the Home Office act unlawfully? His lawyers think so. They argue decisions about his protection weren't taken properly, that they were irrational and unjustifiable, singling out Harry and treating him unfairly. The Home Office disagrees.
The Home Office side say that the decision was not unreasonable, that it was perfectly proper for this committee to take everything into account. Prince Harry is no longer a working royal, and therefore he isn't going to be treated in the same way as the King and presumably the most senior members of the royal family, but he is going to get a level of protection.
Since he left for the States, Prince Harry has been locked in a legal fight over security. He now has provision on a case-by-case basis, but says he's being treated less favourably than other VIPs. It all comes as others in his family have faced the fallout from revelations in a book. Back on the beat and working through the allegations, the King at a Coptic church and Kate opening a children's hospital. They've not publicly commented, and neither have the Sussexes.
Prince Harry not here in person, but he will have been watching proceedings closely. The removal of his automatic security is, he says, one of the big reasons it's been so difficult for him to bring his family back to Britain.
Most of this case will be heard in private, the final decision due at a later date. It is one of Harry's 5 High Court challenges, a 3-day legal showdown that's been years in the making. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Junior doctors are set to walk out again in what will be the longest strike in NHS history. There'll be 3 days of industrial action before Christmas, followed by a 6-day strike from the 3rd to the 9th of January. The Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, says walking out will put extra pressure on the NHS during the busy winter period and risk patient safety. Ministers and the British Medical Association failed to settle a pay dispute following more than a month of talks. Well, it was Energy Transition Day at COP28, with delegates in Dubai debating the details of how to phase out the use of fossil fuels, including how to achieve a 30% reduction in the amount of methane gas being emitted into the atmosphere. Well, Sky News has been given exclusive access to new evidence showing the world's worst culprits when it comes to methane emissions. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
Much of the heat at the climate conference is over carbon dioxide, but cuts to another greenhouse gas, methane, could give us the best chance of keeping the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Methane causes 80 times more warming than carbon dioxide, but it persists for just a decade, not centuries like CO2. So turning off the taps has a quick impact. Now, Sky News has been given exclusive data by the methane monitoring company Kairos, which uses satellites to monitor non-natural sources of the gas. So far this year, it has detected around 1,300 large emissions. This isn't from burning fossil fuels, it's methane leaks from drilling, mining, pipelines and landfill sites. Turkmenistan and Central Asia produced the most, followed by the United States, India, Russia and Pakistan. The biggest single oil and gas source was on the Chelkan Peninsula in Turkmenistan, where a leak from one facility is estimated to have peaked at 333 tonnes an hour in August. The hourly rate is the equivalent to the carbon dioxide emissions from a car driving almost 38,000 miles. Coal is also a problem, with one facility in Shaanxi, China, peaking at around 181 tonnes an hour last February. And some of the leaks are persistent. A blowout at a well in Kazakhstan was pumping out between 21 and 56 tonnes of methane every hour for 153 days between June and November. Now, 150 countries signed the global methane pledge at the Glasgow Climate Conference to cut emissions by 30% by 2030, and they're expected to reveal how they'll do it at COP28 in Dubai. The US has just announced new rules forcing oil and gas companies to monitor for leaks and then plug them. It should cut emissions by 58 million tonnes between 2024 and 2038. According to the organisers of the global methane pledge, if countries stick to their promises, it could reduce global warming by 0.2 degrees by 2050, preventing 250,000 premature deaths from extreme heat. There are few easy wins when it comes to climate change, but cutting methane really is a big deal.
Tomorrow, the man in charge of the UK's response to the pandemic will finally have his say when Boris Johnson begins giving evidence to the COVID inquiry. Sky News understands that the former Prime Minister will make a robust defence of his decisions during the pandemic, including the timing of the lockdowns. But he is expected to apologise for the government's mistakes in its handling of the crisis, as our political correspondent Tamara Cohen now reports.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
The COVID inquiry is building up to its most anticipated witness. We've heard a lot about him from other key players. How he veered like a trolley for and then against restrictions. He was bamboozled by the science. It was not the right crisis for his skill set. He suggested letting the bodies pile high. Many witnesses have said the UK was too slow to lock down in March 2020, that the messaging was confused.
I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody, you'll be pleased to know.
And the government was plagued by denial and dysfunction as the second wave loomed. I understand that Boris Johnson will apologise for mistakes the government made, but believes he got the big calls right on the vaccine and the timing of restrictions. His allies say he'll push back hard on suggestions that the system was screaming of the need to lock down, but that he had his fingers in his ears. Those in his inner circle say he knows his legacy is at stake.
He's not going there to settle old scores or to name-call people who've been rude about him. He's going there very seriously, having submitted a vast swathe of documents and a very detailed statement to explain the context in which unbelievably difficult and unprecedented judgment calls about lives and livelihoods and so much else had to be made. Does he think he got it 100% right? Of course not. It would be a terrible mistake if his appearance at the inquiry was treated like some sort of Christmas pantomime and he was the pantomime villain.
All guidance was followed completely during Number 10.
His reputation brought down by revelations about parties in Number 10 which broke COVID laws.
The guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Boris Johnson faces 2 days of questioning about the events which brought normal life to a grinding halt. Whether his evidence changes anyone's mind is another matter. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Westminster.
And we'll have a full coverage of Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry all day tomorrow and on Thursday on Sky News, plus a special programme each day at 9 o'clock. Well, now for a bit of sport, the Lionesses have missed out on qualifying for next year's Olympic Games in Paris, despite beating Scotland 6-0 in the Nations League. England had to better the Netherlands score against Belgium by 3 goals in order to top their group and qualify for Paris. But despite hitting the Scots for 6, it wasn't enough, with the Dutch winning their game 4-0. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Joining us here in the studio, we are joined by the former leader of Scottish Labour, now director of the John Smith Centre at Glasgow University, Kezia Dugdale. That is not you. And the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. We'll fix the order in a moment. Welcome to both of you. And among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front page of the Telegraph, their headline, ministers threatening to quit over the Rwanda flights law. Discussing that and plenty more when we come back. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. Israel has said today has been the most intense day of fighting in Gaza since the ground offensive began in October, as Israeli troops reached the southern city of Khan Yunis. The Home Secretary has signed a new treaty with Rwanda, which he insists will address the legal issues which have prevented the UK from deporting asylum seekers to the East African country. And a 28-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a pregnant woman was stabbed in the South Wales village of Aberfan. Schools and a community centre had to be locked down after the attack. Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the former leader of Scottish Labour, now Director of the John Smith Centre at Glasgow University, Kezia Dugdale, with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to both of you. So let's check out the front pages then, starting with The Guardian, which leads with a report on what's been described as apocalyptic conditions in Gaza, and a warning from the UN that they are blocking aid getting into the area. It's a done deal. That's how the Metro describes the new treaty signed by the UK and Rwanda to send asylum seekers there for processing from next year. But the Daily Telegraph says 10 senior Conservatives are threatening to quit if the Prime Minister presses ahead with the Rwanda plan. The Eye looks ahead to Boris Johnson giving evidence to the COVID inquiry over the next 2 days, with the headline posing one important question from families. Why did the bodies were to come into force from January the 1st? A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. While you listen to our guests, so let's head straight to them. Henry Hill, Kezia Dugdale, welcome to both of you. And let's kick off with The Guardian then. The warning of conditions in Gaza as Israel starts to surround, the second biggest city, the biggest city in the south, the place that had once been safe, Khan Yunis.
And the headline reads, apocalyptic conditions in Gaza. And we've seen that from your own footage tonight. I mean, absolutely harrowing scenes, heroic journalism, actually, to show us just exactly what's happening and just how devastating it is. The story in The Guardian leads from comments from Martin Griffiths, the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator, who's speaking on behalf of all the international aid agencies. And they're basically declaring there's just nothing they can do now to support the 2.3 million people living in Gaza because the conditions are just so poor and so desperate. He said the only tool that they have left now is to call for a ceasefire, and he's on record saying it would be an illusion for the world to think that the people in Gaza can be helped by the humanitarian operation under these conditions. So a real insight into just how desperate things are and how long ago now a ceasefire feels.
And we certainly reported at the weekend about how people are being told to go to a bit of coastal strip, dusty, but it's got zero facilities. So, UNICEF saying today that people are leaving, albeit devastated homes with a little bit of water, to places that are dust bowls with no water and no facilities at all now.
No, absolutely. And if you think about the logistics in the West, if you get an event wrong, and you don't have adequate water, loos, toilets, food, and so on, it can be an absolute catastrophe.
Heading into winter as well.
Precisely. Now you scale that up to somewhere like Gaza, which of course has a population of millions of people, and you are looking at a recipe for disaster. The challenge is, of course, that Gaza is an active war zone. The Israeli Defense Force is still conducting a military operation against Hamas. It's very hard to operate in those conditions. We did just have a ceasefire. Operations have now resumed. It's going to be very difficult to imagine that the Israeli military is going to allow another ceasefire so quickly, because the danger is that would become indefinite. But the question remains, what do you do about all of these civilians, whom everybody agrees are not legitimate targets of war and do need support, who are having their infrastructure demolished and cannot get out?
And what Martin Griffiths is saying in this interview with The Guardian is that it's enough now. It has to stop. So where does the pressure come? Or does Israel have to finish its operation to clear the Hamas tunnels and clear Hamas first? Or can the Americans, for example, now begin to put pressure on Israel to cease some of its operations?
So I think that's where these remarks land, is on the doorstep of the Americans to be harder with Israel with regards to what happens next. is such a powerful force in terms of influencing anything that Israel is likely to do, that I feel like Joe Biden will feel the pressure from these types of comments from the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator. You've got the entire international aid community saying there's nothing we can do. You really have to listen to that.
OK, we'll certainly keep an eye on that. There's the front page, a very dramatic front page from The Guardian. But we move on to the Rwanda coverage, of which there is plenty, including in the Metro. It's a done deal. James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, the third, I think, Home Secretary who has flown to Kigali. As Labour points out, more Home Secretaries than asylum seekers have gone, but they said that after one. Anyway, is it a done deal, and has it answered those questions set by the UK Supreme Court, who ruled the Rwanda plan was unlawful?
So we won't know until there has been another legal challenge that has worked its way through the court system. That's the problem with trying to make any determination. Because, of course, on the original ruling, the government won in the High Court. It then lost in the Court of Appeal, which was a surprise, and then it lost in the Supreme Court. So presumably this treaty is addressing the non-refoulement problems, which is the idea that basically Rwanda cannot guarantee the safety of people who go there. There is a danger that they will be returned to their countries of origin where they're in danger. Presumably this treaty is going to lock all of that down. But what will happen is, if the government tries to restart the Rwanda scheme, is that there will be another legal challenge, and they will not be able to proceed with the Rwanda scheme, because there will almost certainly be an interim injunction, until it has gone all the way through the court system again. Now, that takes us almost up to the election, even if this does end up working.
Yes, and the specifics of the changes that James Cleverly is confident will change how the courts react to this are, for example, an appeals process overseen by British and Commonwealth judges, a key commitment that no one will be removed by Rwanda to any other country other than to the UK, which is a complete change and one of the big issues, wasn't it? Experts from the UK will also be seconded to Rwanda to assist with the processing of asylum decisions there. People sent to Rwanda will have free legal assistance, and so on. Your take on this, Kezia?
Well, I think James Cleverly has done his very best to try and fill in all the loopholes from that particular court case. But when he was pushed and asked, so when will we see a flight leave? Can you promise us there'll be one before the next general election? He was unable to answer that, or at least didn't want to answer that, because it would have been something that he was going to be held up to in months to come. Henry's absolutely right. We are going to see further legal challenge here. I suspect that we never will see a plane leave the ground in this context. But this story will rumble on regardless, because the Conservatives can't afford for it to not. This is critical to the Stop the Boats strategy. There's merit, or there's some sense of campaigning strategy, and there being a constant iteration of new attempts to make this happen, even though they know it's never going to happen. And even if it did, it would do so very little to address the fundamental issues at the heart of the asylum system. That's about processing in Britain. It's not about flights in Rwanda.
Yeah, it's a big week for migration, isn't it? The efforts on legal migration at the start of the week, many people suggesting it means that you can't be a Brit and fall in love abroad, but we'll come to that a bit later on, possibly. We've had the Rwanda visit by the Home Secretary. We know it's going to be brought before Parliament as well, effectively to deem Rwanda safe. And yet the Tories, Henry, are chewing themselves up about this again, aren't they? Front page of the Daily Telegraph, ministers threaten to quit over Rwanda flights law. Bring us up to date.
Well, yeah, so the Telegraph has not said who they are, but apparently 10 members of the government have threatened to resign if the Prime Minister pushes ahead with this sort of full fat option of using notwithstanding clauses to essentially set aside Britain's ECHR commitments in the case of Rwanda, or using a bill to declare Rwanda safe in British law, which you can do in the British Constitution, but effectively what would just cut through and short-circuit most of these objections that have been causing legal challenges. That's what the right of the party wants. But as you say, people on the left of the Conservative Party are saying that actually that's a red line for them, and if the government starts playing fast and loose with those commitments, then they will resign from the government. And of course that will again completely derail Rishi's latest effort to fight back. But on the other hand, if he doesn't do it and he stalls again, there are at least as many MPs on the right of the party, with the ERG and all the rest, who are equally prepared to cause trouble.
ERG,
the European Research Group.
Yeah, Common Sense.
Yeah. The New Conservatives, yeah, all of them.
There's three groups on that side,
Absolutely.
and on the One Nation side, I think I heard today there's 106 Tory MPs on that side. I mean, it's two trenches, two tribes going to war on this again. Here we go again. And yet, does it distract from actually trying to get a policy that works for the British people?
Well, the policy that would work for the British people would be to invest in the asylum system here in the United Kingdom. And that's the one thing the Tories seem really reticent to want to do.
Specifically in what way? In terms of
processing backlog? addressing the backlog, and that's about people in the Home Office sitting there processing through the applications. That costs money. That's a bigger state. That's lots of processes that the Conservatives don't naturally like. That's why they're so focused on 3-word sentences like stop the boats and 1-word answers like the Rwanda policy. It's not enough. And you can see the damage that having such a kind of infantile approach to an issue has within the party itself. You've got, as you see, internal warfare within the Conservative Party. This is the new Europe when it comes to the Conservatives. It will rumble on for 12 months to come. It will define the election. And the only way I think that the Prime Minister gets through that is if James Cleverly has done everything he can this week without having to pull out of the ECHR. If this plan that he's pulled together this week works and a plane leaves, it might just be able to get through the election without this warfare, but that feels very unlikely right now.
Yes, I mean, it's the theme of the lead on the front page of The Guardian as well, isn't it? Tory right in threat to Sunak on Rwanda. Tory MPs at loggerheads as competing factions engage in last-minute lobbying efforts. I mean, is it the new Europe, do you think? And actually, you know, talking about legal migration is the only way to reduce migration, actually, to rejoin the European Union.
Oh, good Lord, no. I mean, the old
Yes.
Europe is worse even than the new. I mean,
you're talking about an extra 500,000.
Can you imagine? I mean, there is an argument but the EU has quite an effective way of keeping people from outside Europe out, and maybe that would be the argument. I'm not entirely sure how that would play. No, the thing that's going to be the next Europe for the Conservatives is immigration and the ECHR, because it is increasingly apparent that you simply cannot have the kind of border control policies that the party increasingly wants within the current framework of our ECHR commitments. And it's also clear that you can't keep on importing 500,000 people a year or reduce that number significantly without fundamental changes to the way the British economy works. And the Conservatives have not confronted any of those challenges. So it is going to tear them to pieces. The government's in a very tricky spot because there are limits to what you can do. The only way you can reliably clear the Home Office backlog is letting everyone in, because the problem is trying to get... Because
people appeal, you mean?
Because people appeal, but also because the problem is deporting people once you've rejected their claim. Because
that takes time too.
It does, especially if they've thrown away their passports, which a lot of them do, and then we can't return them, and then you just have them stuck in limbo, in detention and all the rest of it. So it is an incredibly tricky situation. It's not the kind of thing you can fix with a year to go until the general election.
OK, here's the Daily Mirror on the same subject. It's Groundhog Day in Rwanda. Cleverly signs another treaty, talking about the 140 million, which he says has not gone up yet, but will rise. You know, and you talked about it in a slightly disdainful way, that you believe probably it's just electioneering, that this is never going to happen. But other European nations are looking into this, aren't they? When a number of other European nations are beginning to look at offshoring as the only means of sort of sorting this out.
And you wonder if they're looking at it and thinking again very quickly, given how difficult it's been as a policy to get off the ground, so to speak, in the United Kingdom. This story tells us that we've spent £140 million of taxpayers' money on a policy that's quite clearly failing because not a single person has left yet. And you've got to assume that with the announcements that James Cleverly has made this week, with those extra policies you described, Anna, around having an appeal system, whistleblowing mechanisms, ensuring that everybody stays in Rwanda regardless of what the outcome of their individual cases, is going to add to that tally of the cost. So you've got to wonder at what point the Conservatives go, well, even if we liked this at one point, surely the cost now bears serious consideration.
Yeah, I mean, it's rising up the ranks of what people care about, but it's still below cost of living, inflation, the NHS, isn't it, as an issue? But will this be central to any election we see next year? Just quickly, Henry.
I mean, yeah, almost certainly. The government simply talks about it for too long at this point. They can't really disown it now. So it's a visible symbol of loss of control. Legal immigration is much bigger, the economic implications are much bigger, but the fact that we have these illegal boat crossings run by gangs is a very tangible symbol of the loss of control by the government, and that's why they need to tackle it.
OK, plenty more still to come. Stay there, both of you. We will continue looking at tomorrow's front pages, including this on the front of the Eye. Why did bodies have to pile high? The question for Boris Johnson. Back in a moment.
So that's apparently where the temperature on the ground level is actually lower than what it is above the cloud level. And so it forces the cloud downwards. That's how I understand it anyway. It was absolutely fantastic. So just funny enough, just the night before, I'd been speaking to a friend about walking on the Malvern Hills. and being there for a cloud inversion. And yeah, sure enough, I saw on social media someone had taken a picture of the sunrise, and I thought, right, I need to get there and experience it myself. But yeah, I'm very privileged to live near to the Malvern Hills, so I was able to get there rather sharpish, yeah. It was my very first one, and yeah, I'm definitely going to be keeping out for when it's foggy in Worcester and make sure to get up on the hills and up above the clouds again. So I've just started my own Instagram account where I've following getting into photography, and so yeah, it's at Nick Sturdy, STURDY on there if anyone wants to have a look.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us.
शांति से इनको समझाओ वरना ये हम लोग
It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Let's just bring you some breaking news about a shooting we've heard about in Hackney in London. A woman has died and 2 people, one a teenager, have been left injured following a shooting in East London. This is according to the Metropolitan Police. 3 people found dead at around 6:30 p.m. In Vine Close in Hackney. A 42-year-old woman died at the scene. 2 others, one who's 20 years old and a man, and a 16-year-old boy were taken to hospital where their conditions are being assessed. Detective Superintendent Vicky Tunstall, we are still in the early stages of our investigation. A team of specialist detectives are working to establish what happened. Officers will remain at the scene overnight. So a woman has died and 2 people, one a teenager, have been left injured following that shooting in East London. Well, welcome back to the press preview. We are joined once again by the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the former leader of Scottish Labour, now Director of the John Smith Centre at Glasgow University, Kezia Dugdale. Welcome to both of you. Boris Johnson COVID inquiry, the next 2 days, takes us to the front page of the Eye. Henry, why did the bodies have to pile high?
So the former Prime Minister is going to be giving evidence for 2 whole days, which means it's all we're going to be talking about, and we get to relive again the glory days of Boris Johnson's administration when he Partygate and all the rest of it, and it's going to be fascinating to watch. I really don't like the way we do inquiries in this country because they're very slow and time-consuming and expensive and all the rest of it. But given that we do them this way, watching Boris Johnson have to defend his decisions on the basis of line-by-line scrutiny by a KC is going to be something special. And there are important decisions that have to be interrogated, like those early decisions right at the beginning about when we went into lockdown. Potentially that had those decisions decided whether huge numbers of people lived or died, right? Now, the politicians are operating under extremely difficult circumstances, and it's important that, it's very easy for journalists especially to sit here with the benefit of hindsight and kind of pronounce on what the politicians should have done in the heat of the moment. But it's vital that if something like this happens again, given that before the pandemic we thought the UK was one of the best prepared countries in the world, and we weren't, that we learn those lessons, and hopefully we will get some light as well as surely an awful lot of heat.
Yes, and let's just see the Daily Telegraph's coverage on this as well. The COVID inquiry should look at the harms of lockdowns. It's something he also wants to see. But as you say, our focus will be on that for the next 2 days. I do want to just touch on the Daily Mail, if you don't mind, Kezia. Junior doctors' strike, the longest in NHS history, at a very, very busy time of the year, obviously.
Absolutely, and I think we thought when Rishi Sunak had his last reshuffle and Steve Barclay was moved out of the health post, this might be a reset moment for all the strikes that were happening within the NHS. And it's very quickly gone back to a bit of the same old with the new Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins. So she was in negotiations with the BMA and the junior doctors, trying to kind of reset that deal, make a bit of progress. But the BMA, according to the Daily Mail, have hastily walked out of that situation. So you've got nurses, pharmacists, paramedics and consultants back at work. Junior doctors still out on strike. 3 days before Christmas, 3 days early in the new year, the worst possible time. That said, though, you've got to remember that for people who have taken the Hippocratic Oath, striking is the absolute last thing they want to be doing. And if the government would negotiate a fair pay deal for them, this wouldn't be happening. So, of course, it's a very heavy angle on the story from the Daily Mail. There is a decent case there for why the junior doctors are striking, but they're doing so at a very difficult time for the country.
Kezia Dugdale, Henry Hill, lovely to have you both on. Thank you. For now, at least. We'll see you for the 11, of course. Let's take a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So it is turning more unsettled and a bit milder from the middle of the week, with heavy rain keeping the risk of localised flooding. Much of Ireland will start wet and windy on Wednesday, but elsewhere it'll be mainly dry with an extensive frost. Low cloud fog around too may bring disruption to travel. That fog's slow to lift, especially across East Anglia. Bulk of the UK will have some sunshine.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.